Okay, so we'll take a look at the idea of fairness. Fair. What is fair? That's not fair. That kind of idea, that fairness. How it relates to the idea of equity as well. So, fairness, we often think of it as related to the concept of justice, which it is, and we'll certainly explore the concept of justice and fairness in a separate video all its own, because that warrants some specific attention. What exactly do we mean by the word justice or fairness? Neither one of those have a specific universally applicable definition. So we're going to have to be a little more specific. And right now we're talking about fairness as it has to do with equity. So what is equity? Remember, equity is that idea that we're trying to give everybody the same outcome, the same results, whether they deserve it or not. That's the equality, or the equity, the equality of outcome, as opposed to the equality of opportunity, so that everybody can earn that outcome depending on how talented, how much their ideas are valued by the rest of society, how much effort, merit they put into their idea or their efforts to attain that specific outcome. So generally, fairness deals with the idea of justice, but we'll deal with it specifically with regard to equity and figure out what fairness means. What does fairness means? To understand fairness, we have to understand the basic idea of impartiality, equality in treatment and outcomes, and we'll look at those each one in turn. So impartiality would be viewing a person, an effort, or a situation without bias, favoritism, or prejudice. Obviously, that doesn't really apply when it comes to group identity politics, where we're specifically looking for favoritism towards specific identity groups, whether those identity groups are based upon gender or ethnicity or race or any other qualifying factor. And right now that qualifying factor is expanding exponentially, so that there are any number of identity groups that will evolve and come about and begin to exist as of today. Each one of these identity groups demanding attention and special treatment from the rest of the world. So there is no exact impartial fairness when it comes to woke society or identity groups, because each of the identity groups in woke society deserve that bias in favor of them as opposed to the rest of the world. So when we're talking about equity as equality of outcome, fairness means that we give a bias in favor of those that need more help getting to those outcomes. And those that get there naturally through their efforts and merit, that work for the results, well, they actually become the enemy. So the people that work for their results, that earn their way through life, that merit, right, that pass the exams and work harder to get the results, they're less important than those people that did not earn their positions, the non-meritorious sorts. Well, that's fairness according to equity thinking. It's totally counterintuitive, isn't it? It goes against your thinking naturally. Well, yeah, mine too. So remember, equity is about providing individuals with what they need to achieve comparable outcomes for everybody else, whether that means a special exam context, so it's easier for them to get through the exam, or reducing the complexity or difficulty of exams so that more people can pass those exams with higher scores. Those kinds of things, whatever we need to do, that's all considered equity. Equality doesn't really play into the idea of identity groups. Because remember, equality kind of goes along with the idea of merit, kind of goes along with the fact that everybody has a natural equality of opportunity to succeed, to do well in life, whether that's in academia, in schools, or in the business world, or in military, or whatever they happen to be a part of. And so fairness, when it comes to equality thinkers, those that are based upon merit, are simply that everybody has the same opportunities. And that's where fairness comes in. Not in the fair outcomes, but in the fair opportunities to attain whatever outcomes that people want. Some people are not all about earning money. They don't want to make the greatest invention so they can become rich people in the world. It's simply not important to them. I happen to be one of those people. I'm doing well enough financially. I'm comfortable with that. But it's never been important to me to earn money. And of course, that's put me in some pretty difficult financial straits as life has gone on, but that's been my choice. It's been my own fault, right? So I can't say that it's ever been unfair to me since I made the conscious choice to go the path that I have chosen to go. And people are that way. Some people choose one path, some people choose another. Doesn't mean that they all deserve the equality of outcome or equity. It means that they all had the same opportunities, and it was fair that they had those opportunities. They just use those opportunities in different ways. Okay, so subjectivity and fairness. When we talk about whether something is fair, if you're an equity thinker, then things are fair if people end up with the same results. All of the pilots have the diversity that you would like to see, the diversity of the population. They're fairly represented within the group of people that are pilots for your airline. Right? You have 13% black. You have 23% Hispanic, if that's what the percentage of the population is. I'm not sure what it is, but it's somewhere around that range. Maybe it's a little higher, 30 or 40% possibly. 40% white, right? No more than that. Without regard to the merit, the skills, the abilities of the people that you're hiring as pilots. That would be subjectively fair according to equitable thinking. Now, when it comes to equality thinking, that's not really fair because there are some people that are better at exams, right? Whether they're Asian or white or Indian or well, I guess Indian would be Asian as well, wouldn't it? Somebody that might fit into those characteristics. We might say that fairness is giving everybody the same opportunity, and everybody has that opportunity to do well on those academic subjects or those examinations, so they can prove themselves to be qualified for the job that they're taking, not basically just because they have skin tone of one shade or another, one melanin content or another, or a gender preference or sexual preference or gender identity. I don't know what the appropriate terms are these days, but you get the idea what I'm talking about. So determination of what is fairness is achieved often depends on the context of the systems in place, but it's more important to view the idea of fairness in the eyes of the beholder. And you can tell where the beholder is going to come down on the issue of fairness basically by understanding where they're coming from on issues of equity versus equality. And that's how fairness relates to that. It's very, very subjective. We see fairness, of course, coming about in our legal systems when we like to say, well, it's not fair that we get this result. We're going to try to bring justice to the victim in this criminal case by having a specific outcome in the courts. Well, that would be an equitable way of looking at fairness, even in the legal system. The legal system was not constructed for that, at least not the American legal system, our common law legal system, particularly in criminal courts, where we start viewing that somebody must be proven guilty beyond reasonable doubt. Not all doubt, but by evidence sufficient to prove that beyond all doubt that is reasonable, this person is guilty or not guilty, or well, guilty. Because if they cannot make the reasonable doubt standard, then they're automatically considered to be not guilty. Social institutions will use the idea of fairness. They can be a little bit more aware of equitable or equity considerations, since they're, by definition, a social institution, an institution that is concerned with the social welfare of people. They can consider more the opportunities or chances to get the same outcomes for the people that are involved. It's not really the job of government to have those types of considerations or purposes, but that's where we might see it. So we might see it, a definition that is equitable for fairness in schools and workplaces, in housing institutions, and stuff like that, right? Social institutions, community and cultural norms. Individuals in the private sector, we can have all kinds of considerations as to what is equitable or what is fair, based upon whether we're equity thinkers or equality thinkers. It doesn't really matter, because it doesn't impact the government, or doesn't cause the government to act in different ways. The only way that it has implications for other members of society is when, if somebody doesn't agree with us, we're willing to cancel them, right? To stop having any kind of communication or discussion with those people, allowing them to become part of their lives, right? I've had some family members that have canceled me from their lives because I'm conservative and they're equity thinkers, right? And so they will no longer communicate with me, which is a little bit absurd, but I'll communicate with them anytime, anywhere, any day of the week, because being actually tolerant, not one that just espouses to be tolerant, which the woke tend to do. They espouse that, but in actuality, they don't really have tolerance. The conservatives, on the other hand, they allow people the freedom to think differently, because we believe in natural rights of freedom of thought and expression, even though it often works against us. Philosophically and morally in our thinking, we looked a little bit at consequentialism and at ethical formalism, even at virtue ethics. Virtue ethics, not really going to have so much the idea of fairness, because it's going to be kind of a moving target as we move from one person to the next, and the extremes for one person turn out to be differently placed than the extremes for the next person. So finding the golden mean from one person to the next is going to have different implications. But when it comes to consequentialism and ethical formalism, fairness has, well, pretty much different definitions according to whether people are thinking in equity terms or in equality of opportunity terms. Equality of opportunity tends to go along with ethical formalist thinking, and equality of outcome thinking or equity thinking tends to go along with the consequentialist. The results, the ends justifying the means. That's necessarily looking at the results and to see if how we got there, or the things that we had to do in order to get there, are justified or not. All right. Practical outcomes. Sometimes we could look at those to determine if something was fair or not in order to help us to get there. That's pretty much it for the idea of fairness. We'll talk more about equity and equality now, but we're going to get into something a little bit different. We're going to get into something called, well, I don't know if it's called by anybody else but me, but it seems like we are in a race. We're a race to accomplish something, to get across the finish line. In the case of equity, I think it's a race to mediocrity. We'll talk about that next in the next video. Thanks for being here.